Hi, my name is Robert Morrison. I'm the Fire Chief and Emergency Management Coordinator for the Township of McKellar. We've been advocating for the FireSmart program since 2024. We've been successful in receiving their grant for the past 2 years, using the funds to create FireSmart brochures with the help of the MLCA, as well as turning our new mini pumper into a mobile educational tool. I'm here to introduce a video presentation that was shot with my friend Shayne McCool back in the spring of 2025. Shayne works with the Aviation, Forest Fire, and Emergency Services Division of the MNR. He started with the MNR as a fire ranger back in 2007, and he's been dispatched across the country on many occasions to very large-scale wildfire events. He took on the role of advisor for the Northeast region in 2021, and he focuses on wildfire mitigation and the FireSmart program. Shayne is presenting to us on the FireSmart program and how you can best utilize it to help protect our community. We hope that you view this as a resource to help you keep McKellar fire safe by being fire smart around your property. Thank you very much.
Very happy to be speaking about the FireSmart program. It's a very unique program to help folks sort of take ownership of mitigation practices on their own property. And so I'll spend some time speaking about some concepts mainly geared towards homeowners. There are other levels of the program we can speak to at both the community level and sort of the neighborhood level. But for today's purposes, I'll be speaking to about the homeowner level. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and start my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, perfect. So move things around here to get me all set. All right. Zoom's a little different than Teams here, but that's okay. We'll get organized here. So again, so FireSmart and your community. My name is Shayne McCool, and thank you for the wonderful introduction, Jennifer. At the end of the presentation, you will see a email address that you can reach out to. That'll reach my team and myself directly, and so feel free to reach out with any of your FireSmart questions there. I know we mentioned questions at the end, and that's perfect. If you don't want to forget your question, feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll take it up at the end of the presentation as well. So let's jump into it here. FireSmart, it's a strategy for wildland fire protection, and the focus is structural ignition prevention. And what we're trying to do is create an environment that's not going to allow our structures to be consumed by wildland fire. We're really trying to prevent fires from burning down structures, but we're not necessarily trying to eliminate the presence of fire itself. We know that fires are very much an integral part of our ecosystem, and they are necessary for the rejuvenation of some tree species, such as jack pine and other coniferous species. They very much rely on fires. So we do require it as part of the boreal forest process. And so living with it, especially when we're living in areas that interlap with our society is the challenge. And so finding ways to adapt to that natural cycle is what FireSmart is all about. So there is good news that essentially a small amount of work, fuel reduction mainly around your home in the ignition zone, it can significantly decrease the structured ignitability for your homes. Even with those large, intense crown fires that you see, we can really see the work around your property have a major impact on the survivability of your structures. Some of the research that was done from this individual in the photo here, Jack Cohen, out of the United States, he did partnerships. There was a partnership that was done up in the Northwest Territories. They did some burns, some plot burning, and they tested out some of the theories that we're going to talk about here today. And what the research shows is that 85 to 90% of homes without flammable roofs and 10 to 20 meters of clearance survive a major wildfire. I will take a second to speak to roofs. Roofs are a very important part of your resilience. As we know, a fire is going to launch embers ahead of it, and those embers are going to land on your roof. If you have a roof that's made out of cedar shakes, untreated cedar shakes, for example, it doesn't really matter what else you're going to do around your property, because your home, the resilience is severely impacted by that roof not being resistant to those embers. So it's very important to have either a steel roof or even asphalt shingles are rated for fires as well. They're very well rated, just to, as long as they're in good condition and they're not curling where the embers can get in underneath of them and ignite what's underneath the shingles. That's where you start to run into problems. But certainly, most homes in Northern Ontario built out of the asphalt shingles or those steel roofs are well rated for forest fires. Um, Again, I mentioned the embers. It's not the big flames that we're necessarily worried about. The big flames will put off radiant heat, and if there's direct flame contact, they will be a concern. But a lot of the times, we're finding it's the embers that account for over half of all home ignitions. Those embers getting lofted ahead of the fire, landing somewhere near your home or your structures, igniting that item, and then that fire transferring to your homes. Okay, so it's those little things is what the research tells us that are tend to ignite homes and structures. This diagram is a really useful diagram. It helps show sort of the progression of a fire. If you look at the screen from the right-hand side to your left, the fire started in that untreated forest area. It starts to gain some momentum. It's moving its way up the ladder fuels, which we call those sort of coniferous immature trees, allowing the fire to move into the crowns of those more mature trees. And then you get what's called a crown fire, where you have that surface to crown major sort of flame front. But then when we get into a fire smarted area, we've removed a lot of those laddering fuels. We've removed a lot of those coniferous components, not all of them, but we're strategic about what we remove. Then the fire is now able to be reduced in intensity. And as it burns towards your structures, it has less and less to consume. And the idea being that the fire can absolutely stop before it reaches your structures or burn around your property entirely if you're making those adjustments. So this is where we get into the home ignition zone. And this is really the concept I want to focus on today, is these three zones. And what you want to remember is essentially focusing at the home and working your way out. So you're going to start at the roof, work your way down, and then out through your vegetation management principles. And we're going to go dive into each one of these zones a little bit more specifically in depth. But I will start with the immediate zone, then move into the intermediate zone, and finally the extended zone. So the immediate zone is your 0 to 1.5 meters. And before we even get to the immediate zone, we want to actually look at the structure itself. That's again, I mentioned the roof being your main component. That's your factor number one. It's going to be the thing that's most susceptible to transferring fire to your home. So you want to make sure you have either the asphalt shingles that are rated for fire, or the steel roof. And most, like I said, most asphalt shingles. If you have an asphalt shingle roof, you're likely in a good spot, unless they're starting to curl and start to get aged. The roof cleanliness is another thing that you want to look at, especially if you have valleys and different structures on the roof. If you have a buildup of debris in one of those valleys, that's allowed to sort of carry flame and then transfer to one of those structures on the roof, then you're going to be in a situation where the fire can potentially get into those areas and transfer. So any overhanging branches, things like that as well, can potentially carry the fire as well. Then we look at eaves, vents, and soffits, any openings that would allow embers or heat and flames to enter into the attic area or inside the structure itself. Even vinyl soffit can melt once it's exposed to heat, so you're better off with some aluminum type closures in those circumstances. And then we're looking at the exterior walls. So we just touched on the roof. Now we're moving down the exterior walls, and we're going to look at different factors, like what's the walls made out of. Is it siding that's there? And if it is vinyl siding, what's behind that siding? A lot of times folks will have siding that's covering up maybe some old stucco. That stucco could be very flame resistant, but if it's maybe plywood or aspenite behind that that vinyl, then you're not as good of a spot as maybe you could be. Vinyl will melt from heat, and it will burn if it has direct flame contact with it. So just keep those things in mind. If it exposes what's behind it, and then now you might be in a worse position for resilience. The balcony, the deck, and the fence, those are flammable structures as well. When we're looking at our immediate zone, we're going to count the deck as part of your structure. And so you're going to extend your 1.5 meters beyond the deck. And then your fences, I'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation, but often it's a really good practice to just switch out the first 5 feet that's connected to your house. If you have a wood deck, I can understand the cost of switching out an entire deck might not be economically feasible, but maybe that first 5 feet switching to a chain link fence or a composite type of material might be a better option for resilience. And then of course, we look at windows and doors. Any openings that would allow embers to get into the home are something that you want to look at closely, and what kind of factors are there. So, for example, if you have an older home, an older camper cottage, and you have the single pane windows, as soon as those are exposed to a significant amount of heat, they will collapse, unfail, or fracture, and heat will and embers will be allowed to enter into the home in that circumstance. So less than ideal. So you're looking at double pane, or at sort of at worst is really what you want to have, and then even tempered windows are even a much better situation to be in. And then we move into factor 7, which is your nearby combustibles. So this is like what's right up against the structure, right up around the area. So that's your firewood, your window boxes, any furniture on the deck, any scrap lumber, fences, things of that nature. Anything that can generate embers or heat, and it's right close to your structure. You want to look at very closely, because that can lead to the ignition of your home or the structure itself. Um, Slopes are also another consideration. This is really a good one if you're building a new camp or a new home. If you're building it right on a slope, we want to understand that fires, generally speaking, will move faster uphill. And the reason for that is they're allowed to preheat the fuels ahead of them. As we know, heat rises. And so they'll move significantly quicker up a hill. So if you're building a new structure, you want to try to set it back from the edge of that slope. And if you're not able to do that, then you want to extend your home ignition zone beyond the 1.5 meters. If you're on a significant slope, maybe you go to 2 meters, maybe you go to 2.5, just to allow yourself more sort of buffer space for that more intensity that you're going to see in that fire. So let's talk a little bit about the vegetation around our structures. We're going to look outwards, and we're going to look at the natural landscape and the vegetation, and basically how fire is going to be affected by that vegetation. We're looking at things like fuel load, so that's the amount of things that are on your property able to burn, the size of that fuel, the moisture characteristics, and the fuel continuity that's being both horizontally and vertically. And not all fuel burns the same, and not all trees will burn the same. I think I heard earlier we were discussing a little bit about the maple trees being a little more resilient, and absolutely that is the case. Whereas your coniferous trees, for example, anything bearing those needle components, the spruce, for example, or jack pine, things like that, they're much more volatile. They have that oily component, and they're much more volatile to spreading fire. And so we want to be cognizant of what those are. So with that in mind, it means as we're making adjustments on our property, there's things that we do need to remove and things that we don't need to remove. So it's very important to understand what those characteristics are. And I always tell folks, if it has leaves on it, generally speaking, you're in a much better spot. Even the birch isn't as much of a concern. Obviously, we know that the birch bark itself will be consumed, and that birch bark can be a hazard as far as transferring fire, because those can turn into embers that kind of float along and can transfer fire that way. But as far as the foliage, the leaves, for example, aren't going to be ignited the same way that a coniferous tree, and the level of heat coming off of that will be significantly less than you'll get from, say, a spruce that's fully involved with fire. So some of the strategies for vegetation management. So they're showing 3 here, but I'll speak to 4. Fuel removal, fuel reduction, and fuel conversion. Those are your principal strategies. But if you run into a situation where you have, for example, you planted a tree with your grandfather, and you really don't want to remove that tree, often you can use a fourth strategy called isolation, where you kind of just leave it on its own, and you can provide sort of removal of the vegetation around it so that that particular tree can stay, and you've isolated, maybe pruned it up to 2 meters to allow a surface fire to pass underneath it. Things like that. We do try to be as flexible as we can with the program. But we do understand that there are times where you need that flexibility to help with your decision making process. Um, so the immediate zone, I spoke to it briefly earlier. This is the first zone that you want to concentrate on outside of the structure itself. And the immediate zone is a fuel-free zone. So we want to create an environment from 0 to 1.5 meters that will not have a chance to support fire of any kind. So there's no chance for direct flame contact. Even the radiant heat aspect we want to limit. And fuel removal or conversion basically are your best strategies for this area of your property. Very important that you start in that area. That's going to be the best bang for your buck. You want to choose fire resistant plants. So I mentioned deciduous trees and shrubs. Those are really, really great. If you have sort of mulch in right up against your property, a really good option is sort of that colored rock or gravel that is not combustible, and it still has that aesthetically pleasing look. And you can still keep your mulch. You just want to move it away from your house, maybe into the extended zone where it doesn't have an opportunity to spread to your structures. Anything with that leafy component is, generally speaking, a really good option. And I'll point you to some resources later on that can help you understand a little bit better what's good and what's bad as far as what you want to have on your property. The juniper trees, the cedar trees, and the conifers that are right up against your home in that immediate zone are going to allow an ember to ignite and then ignite that particular tree, and it's going to transfer to your home through direct flame contact and potentially burn your home down. And so it's not that we need to eliminate them from our property completely. It's just that we don't want them in that 1.5 meter zone because it's going to easily transfer fire to the structures. So we want to keep that in mind. Anything needle bearing, anything that could dry out quickly, even long cured grass, by cure we mean that sort of dead looking grass that's right up against your home, it's going to carry fire. And so we want to be very aware of that. Springtime, we know that before green up conditions, things are a little bit more volatile, but when we're doing our assessments, we're looking at full green up conditions, and that's going to be sort of a little bit more reasonable approach for the program here. And I'll mention some more tips for long grass later on in the presentation. Let's move into the intermediate zone. This is the secondary zone. It's a 1.5 to 10 meters from your structures. You're going to create an environment that's only going to support fire of lower intensity. So here we're going to be doing fuel reduction, fuel removal, and conversion as our principal strategy. So the idea being, as the fire enters into that 10 meters away from your structure zone, it's going to slow down significantly in intensity, and it's going to slowly run out of fuel to consume as it enters into that immediate zone where it should have nothing left to consume. And if it's done properly and everything sort of goes our way, then the fire is going to burn around our structures rather than burning them down. And again, you want to take a reasoned approach to fuel treatment that considers those other values we talked about, like that visual quality, the wildlife habitat, things like that. And it's often just you can have the best of both worlds if you need to do an isolation strategy in this zone, by pruning and leaving that one conifer tree on its own. That might be an option here. It's just it's about reducing your risks overall. And let's jump in now to the extended zone. That's the last, you can see here the 10 to 30 meter zone here on the edge of the property where you see the dark green. That's the zone where we get into creating an environment that's going to ideally take a fire from a crown fire, a fully involved crown fire, and now turn it into a surface fire. So a fire of less intensity. And then as it gets closer to the home, it runs out of fuel. That's the idea here. So what we're doing in this environment is we're creating that situation where it's only going to reduce the fire's intensity as it enters into the zone. And we're going to do that through some understory thinning. We're going to maybe remove some trees that are growing in the under the canopy, or even some of the taller trees to leave some of those immature trees. You want to have a nice variety. You can see the before and after photo here of like that sort of the work that was done in the area. You have some removal, but you're spacing out your conifers Usually they say it's a 3 meter spacing apart from crown to crown and 2 meters pruning up the tree. And what that does is it allows a surface fire to pass underneath the crown of the tree. But also if the tree does candle and ignite from top to bottom, it's much harder for that fire to transfer from tree to tree. It doesn't have necessarily the momentum it needs to do that. And again, you want to be selective. You don't want to just leave all your mature trees. And you want to leave some immature trees here and there as well, so that you have a nice variety of trees in your area, and things are allowed to replenish as they would in the natural cycle. So things that you want to do is to keep your trees pruned and spaced, as I mentioned in the last slide. Remove dead branches as they fall off. So those would be a lot of times you'll see birch trees, for example, will drop a lot of branches and things of that nature. You pick those up periodically to keep yourself in a good spot as far as resilience. Those encroaching conifers, you want to thin out the shrubs as well periodically. Mow your lawn regularly and remove any of that surface litter annually. And of course, we all know that the leaves that build up and die, that could be a source of fuel for a fire. So we want to remove those as well. There are some assessments as well that are available, and there's no guarantees, but effective home ignition zone treatment dramatically increases home survival chances. And you're really not helpless. The mitigation efforts that we talked about here, they can really make a big difference. And there's some assessments that are available on FireSmartCanada.ca, and I'll have some resources here later in the slideshow that can really help you with just going around your property and understanding maybe where you're falling short, or maybe you're in a good spot, right? It really just helps with that sort of overall assessment of where you're at. We know about the Wildfire Community Preparedness Day grants. I think Stephen has some announcements on that one here a little later on, so stay tuned. But certainly this is a grant that any individual can apply for. It's $500 and it's available to anyone. You can apply between November 1st and January 31st. What it is you can host a FireSmart event between May and October. And again, it's open to anyone. You can apply for that one on November 1st at FireSmartCanada.ca. Really great event. I think we have, I want to say it's 47 this year across Ontario. We're seeing this event get picked up a lot by cottage associations, even individuals that are really trying to make a difference in their community. So it's really a good starting point for folks to start the conversation about wildfire preparedness in their community, and different elements that they can take on. Even if you're doing a cleanup day, for example, you can use that $500, put it towards the rental of a chipper, for example, things of that nature, or even the dumping fees if at your local landfill, things of that nature. So even if you have got the program started and you're already aware of FireSmart and now you want to start doing some work, you can still apply for this grant. And it, it's not much, $500. I know it doesn't go a long way these days, but it is a starting point at least. And that's what we're hoping for, is to get the word going for folks and get folks a little bit more motivated to do some of that resilience work around the community. I also like to talk about local FireSmart committee, and the reason I mentioned this one is it's really good practice to have, and you can attach this to, again, local FireSmart, local cottage association, or any other organization you already have in place, and just put FireSmart sort of on the agenda. But what you want to do ideally is recruit others from the neighborhood and the community where you live or work. And you can have anyone from homeowners, residents, fire professionals, land managers, planners, members of other interest groups, anybody who's really interested in taking action in the community. And this is really going to help you prepare for the wildfire planning, the wildfire preparedness planning, right? And this is a nice cue for our new program called the Neighborhood Recognition Program. And really what that involves is a group of homes, up to 80 homes, give or take, can apply for the Neighborhood Recognition Program. There's 6 steps that you have to go through. First, you want to identify that neighborhood champion, somebody who's going to sort of lead the way for the FireSmart team. You want to build that neighborhood committee, as we just talked about in the last slide, and they're going to champion sort of the initiative and take the leadership of the elements of this recognition program. The main one being wildfire hazard assessment that gets completed by somebody in my organization after you've established your committee and have shown that you're looking to take those next steps towards that neighborhood recognition program milestones. You're going to develop that mitigation plan. Once you have that hazard assessment in your hand, you'll have a better idea of where to take action in the community and what steps to take. You're going to teach residents FireSmart knowledge and involve them in that cleanup event. And that's the actual boots on the ground mitigation piece. And then afterwards, you're going to celebrate your success and then put in your application. And if you do meet the criteria, there's a recognition sort of plaque that you can get, and also an additional $500 on top of the $500 preparedness day if it's your first year going through this program, that you get an additional five. So it's $1,000 total if you were to do a neighborhood cleanup, for example. This is you would have to apply for the preparedness day grant first, meet these milestones, and then apply for the neighborhood recognition program at the end. But we would have to do it before and after sort of campaign. But in any event, it is a program to help get folks actually boots on the ground and a little bit more resilient for folks that are taking it seriously. So new program. We haven't seen any neighborhoods get recognized yet in Ontario, but we are looking to support neighborhoods who are looking to go down this path. Some of the resources I was speaking to earlier, I would highly recommend anybody who's interested in FireSmart to look at the FireSmart 101 course. These are all available. Everything I'm going to mention here is available at firesmartcanada.ca. It's a really excellent website, very intuitive, very easy to use. FireSmart 101 is about 45 minutes long. It's a highly interactive course, and it gives you sort of that introductory knowledge that you need for FireSmart and to get you started as a community sort of ambassador. There's that FireSmart Begins at Home manual. There's that's the blue book that's one of our most popular items for FireSmart. It gives you sort of the introductory level knowledge as well. There's a FireSmart guide to landscaping as well. So I mentioned earlier sort of the good and the bad of what to plant around your property. That guide to landscaping is a really good tool to help you understand what's good around your property, what should and shouldn't be planted. And also, as I understand, there's some conversations about shoreline plantations and stuff like that. This one might be a good tool for you to use as well for some of those considerations. I mentioned the neighborhood recognition program. The home ignition zone self-assessment and poster. So that's again available at firesmartcanada.ca. You can get that through their website. And the poster is really handy because it has tips and tricks on it as well. So that's something you can print off and put at your local community center, or just share around by email or social media, however you want to do it that way. There's also a FireSmart last minute checklist, which helps if you're in an evacuation type situation. It gives you some of the ins and outs there. If you're doing a new development, home development guide is a really good option as well. Your wildfire resilience best practice checklist for home construction. So if you're doing renovations or new construction, there's a bit of a checklist for you there as well. And then on top of all that, there's a bunch of FireSmart fact sheets that can really help get you set up for any of the messaging you want to get across to folks. So with that, I'm going to take a few minutes here. I've got about 10 or so tips and tricks to help you get FireSmart on your property. For those of you that want to go digital, in addition to the assessment that I provided, that's available on firesmartcanada.ca, you can download the FireSmart Begins at Home app. That one you can get on Apple Play Store or the Android, or Apple or Android, whichever one. It is available there. And what it is that digital sort of tool where you can walk around your property with your cell phone and go through this checklist. And it gives you that home assessment. And again, it provides you with some of those details to help you understand where you might be falling short on your property. So really, really handy tool to have if you're doing a home assessment. Number two here, you want to take the time to remove any combustible material from under your deck. Reason being, we know that a wildland fire is going to come into the area, low embers ahead of it. Those embers go under your deck, and it's really easy to ignite what's underneath your deck. It's sheltered from the wind. Those embers can sort of linger for a little bit longer. So if you have combustible material under there, that's easy to transfer to your deck. So you want to create that non-combustible zone around your house and deck. Oftentimes, I recommend closing off your deck as well. You can use some sheathing, whether that's that 3 mm screen that you can sort of install there around your deck just to keep the embers out. That's another good option. But even if you're taking all the combustible material out from under your deck, you're still in a much better spot that way. Clean your and maintain your gutters and roofs. Keep the deck and balconies clear of any leaves or debris. Again, we're thinking about how embers are going to ignite. So you can do all this work, but if an ember lands in your gutter where you haven't cleaned it out, and there's some nice dry leaves in there that are receptible to those embers, it could ignite, potentially melt your vinyl uh, gutters and expose the wood behind it and potentially ignite your home that way. So it's really good to keep those cleaned out periodically as well. One more quick one for the decks. Oftentimes, my colleague Ken really likes to use this example is in the wintertime, we have a good idea of where the snow builds up on our deck. You get those snow drifts that sort of tend to build up in the same area. It's going to be the same thing for embers. They'll tend to get pushed to the same type of areas. So if that being the case, you want to sort of take note of that in the wintertime, and in the summertime, you can use that same strategy to understand where the embers will accumulate, and maybe you keep that area and pay a little more attention to that area to make sure that there's nothing in there that can potentially ignite. And grass. I mentioned grass earlier, or if your lawn's like mine, you have a lot of weeds. um, 10 centimeters or less is a really good practice. Then fire can't really sustain itself, especially if it's green. The fire's not going to carry in green grass. But 10 centimeters or lower, very good situation for you. Even when it's before green up, that 10 centimeters or less will reduce the fire's intensity significantly. It may still creep towards your house, but you're going to have a lot more opportunity to reduce the fire intensity. And ideally, you have a gap from the grass to where the combustible materials start on your home. And so even if it does carry to your home, it still has much less of an opportunity to spread to your home. We mentioned it already, but plant wildfire resistant vegetation to reduce flammability of your landscape. So that means you can have some beautiful vegetation right up against your home. It just has to be the right ones. A cedar tree, not so good, but you can have that leafy component, that maple, like we mentioned earlier, right nearby. Of course, you want to mention some trees will have roots that might impact your foundation, so be aware of that. But certainly, if you're doing a garden, the right vegetation in the right place can look beautiful and be fire resistant at the same time. I mentioned 3 mm screens already. You want to close off any vents, any openings into your attic, for example, or into your home with this 3 mm vent screening. And don't go with the vinyl because the vinyl will just melt once it's contacted by the embers. You want to go with like a steel or aluminum type screening because what will happen is it'll prevent those embers from entering into the home. The dryer vent, however, that's going to be a louver type vent, so don't make adjustments there. That ideally, when it's working properly, it'll push the air out, but it'll close as soon as it's done. So you don't want to adjust the dryer vent just for it can get clogged up, and we don't want to. The screen for the dryer vent isn't a good option. So otherwise, though, you might be in a good spot to switch out and make sure everything's screened off so embers can't enter the home. I mentioned pruning trees to create a 2 meter clearance from the ground all the way up. That 2 meters is going to allow that surface fire to pass right underneath of it. And then you want to try to have that 3 meter clearance from crown to crown. Make sure when you're pruning, though, you aren't pruning more than 2/3 of the tree. If you prune more than 2/3 of the tree, it's going to create a situation where the trees could potentially die off. So you want to be selective in how you do your pruning. Isolation might be a better technique for some of those more immature trees. And don't worry about the deciduous trees. I know the photo is showing some leaves in this one here, but don't worry about those deciduous trees. They don't carry fire the same way. We're really worried about the conifer component as opposed to those deciduous trees. They're much less volatile. Firewood. This is a tricky one. A lot of folks who burn for heating. Oftentimes we keep that firewood nice and close to their outside doors so they can access it. Understandably so. I'd like to offer some tips and tricks for that. You want to keep your firewood 10 meters away from your home, but there are some sort of workarounds for that. If you want to get yourself a steel box, for example, that has a lid on it, you can put your firewood in there and keep the rest of your pile sort of 10 meters away, and then you still have nice access to your wood. I've heard of folks using welding blankets too, where they kind of put the welding blanket on top of their wood pile, so that if embers land on it, or it doesn't have that direct flame contact opportunity. So some good ideas there, but certainly be aware that that wood pile is a fuel mechanism for transfer to your home. And another big one, which I can't believe I didn't mention yet, was sheds and structures that are around your property. You want to hold them to the same standard as your home. The reason being is if your shed is within that home ignition zone and it ignites, it is now a potential exposure to ignite your home. And so you want to treat your shed to the same standard you would your home so that it doesn't ignite and create a potential for direct flame contact or even ember transfer to your home. Okay, so this is why you want to hold it to the same standards. And that's definitely an important factor there. Have an evacuation plan for your household. So that's just easy as a quick conversation for folks that have families living in the house. You want to make sure everybody's aware of what to do if you have a wildfire come into the area. You want to have a 72-hour pack, for example, something that you can grab and go with, and have a checklist so that what medications you have to leave with in a hurry and things of that nature. We know that when an emergency occurs, we don't always have the right mindset to start thinking about these things. So if you have a list already laid out for you, you have an evacuation plan and a bit of a checklist of what to grab when you're leaving can be really, really helpful during an emergency situation. And sometimes it happens very quickly. So that will complete my presentation. You can see here affps.mitigation@ontario.ca. That is our email address where you can reach out to us directly. That's my mitigation team. We do keep an eye on that and check it throughout the day. So certainly send us a note there if you have any FireSmart questions, and we'd be more than happy to get you back and help you out and give you any support that you need for your FireSmart journey. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it back over to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Shayne. That was really very, very interesting. And I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge about protecting our homes from wildfires. I think that Steve Macdonell has a couple of announcements about wildfire days that are coming up in McKellar, and then he'll see if you have any questions.
Sure. One point about pruning trees, it's the 1/3 rule. Leave 2/3, only take 1/3, or your trees.
Leave 2/3. Yes, I think I had to mix up backwards. Thanks for that.
I think so.
Yeah, thank you.
So we the MLCA and the fire department in McKellar, Rob Morrison and we've been strategizing for a couple of years on how to get this message out. And we started last year with presentation at Ribfest, which we'll do again this year. And we're also doing one at Herdville Community Club on July 20th. It's going to be a barbecue, free food, and music. And what we've been trying to do, and I know the chief is doing this, he wants to be friendly. He wants people to feel welcome to come talk to them. They're partners. And as well, at the Herdville event, we'll have our resident landscape architect who works on our tree program there as well, offering if you have questions about landscaping with respect to wildfire preparation. So things are happening. We're trying to move forward, and next year we'll try to get to another spot in the community so that we could spread the word around. And we thank FireSmart for helping us. The 500 helps a lot, surprisingly. So that's what's happening, and that's all I had to say about that. And I guess we'll get into questions now. And there was one question now there's two questions.
Yeah, I see a couple there. Yeah, I can take them, Stephen, if you'd like.
Sure, go ahead.
Right on. Yeah, so first one is, are fireworks a risk
Sorry,
of starting?
I don't understand.
Never mind. That was my phone.
Oh, okay, no worries. Yeah, so our fireworks are risk to starting wildfires. The short answer is yes. During times of dry periods, just like any other ignition source, they can certainly start wildfires. The thing is with fireworks, I would say check your local bylaws. There may be some bylaws that restrict the use of fireworks. Provincially, the position is if your fireworks are set off and they start a fire, you could be held accountable for the costs of extinguishing that fire, just as is the case if you have a campfire that escapes on you or things of that nature. So certainly something you want to make sure that you take stock in. That if it's dry and windy and things of that nature, you want to make sure that you're being extremely careful. Myself, I wouldn't be setting them off just because I know the costs of putting out wildfires can sometimes extend into the millions, several millions, especially when you get water bombers involved. I wouldn't be taking that chance when it's hot and dry, but certainly teach their own there. So hopefully that answers the first question. Feel free to follow up though. Um, how far down how far down under the ground does the heat of the fire spread? So underground root fire. This is a good question. I run into this question quite a bit, and I'll answer it by stating it depends. Time of year plays a big factor. Drought plays a big factor. Oftentimes when we're fighting fire, you'll see springtime fires will just generally be on the surface because the ground's still wet and still moist. And it doesn't have an opportunity to sort of dig in, if you will. But as we progress through the summer, we get drier and drier conditions, that the fires can get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so it really just depends on the type of year we have and the type of conditions we have below the surface level. If it's raining all the time, if you get a year where it's really, really wet, and you have like heavy saturated rains that penetrate, then you've got less of a concern with those sort of underground fires. But if you're just getting a little sprinkle of rain here and there, and it's just sort of wetting the surface and it's not saturating the ground, then in those situations you can get significant underground fires that take a lot longer for our crews to extinguish. Again, hopefully that helps. Feel free to follow up. Is there any additive for paint or stains for decks that make the deck more fire resistant? I've heard of products out there that exist. Unfortunately, I don't have any specific products there. I would say do some research there or talk to your local hardware store representatives. They might have some stuff that's a little bit more resistant to fires. I would hesitate to say anything's completely fire resistant, but certainly you might have a product out there that's going to increase your resilience. And I would highly recommend, if that's something that's available, to take a look at that. With decks are a bit tricky. I'm not going to lie, they are. Most of them are made out of wood, right? And so there are some FireSmart Canada items that are coming out now that you'll see them in the next year or so get populated on the website. Really, what it involves is switching out that sort of top layer of decking for sort of a more composite material. Can be expensive, so I understand it's not necessarily the best scenario, but ideally over time, if you are updating your deck, what happens is these materials will last significantly longer than wood. And so you might be looking at switching out your deck. Well, if you move to wood, you might get 10 or 15 years out of it, whereas these composite, you're going to get 3 times that lifetime, if not more. And so it might be worth spending a little bit more money on your deck in those situations, just to avoid that upkeep portion of decking. But certainly not a perfect scenario for decks, but ideally closing them off so the embers can't get underneath, and putting away patio furniture, for example, things like that. Because if you have embers that land on your deck, the heat normally transfers up, right? So the risks aren't super high until that same ember is right up against your house and it's allowed to sort of fester there, and it has combustible material there. Then you're going to have sort of higher and higher risks. It's sort of a numbers game with decks that way. I was looking at some photographs of some communities that were burned through, and we saw situations where the deck had like a hole in the middle of it, but it didn't spread to the house. And then you saw other houses where they were completely gone. So it's a bit of a percentage game that way. But I would certainly look at reducing the amount of combustible material that's on your deck and looking at some of those products that might be out there that can increase your resilience.
Shane, there's a
And-
few follow-up questions with respect
Yeah,
to, so one is composite decking fire resistant or just burns slower?
there can be fire resistant composite products out there for sure. I know there's some stuff that's sort of cement based. That stuff is quite a bit, well, it's very almost fireproof, if you will. But you got to remember the actual structure of the deck itself. If that's made out of wood still, a lot of times there's things you can do to wrap them and protect them with other materials as well, like the posts that are leading into the ground, for example, things like that. So there are steps you can take to increase your resilience with the deck. You just want to look closely at what's exposed to direct flame contact and where any openings are for embers to be able to build up. So certainly there are items out there, those composite decking materials that can be fire resistant or even some fireproof.
So there's a couple more questions, but about decks, like I have a wood deck.
Yep.
If I were to take the deck boards and replace them with composite, but leave the substructure, that would probably help a lot, wouldn't it?
Well, it's going to help for any of the embers that accumulate on top, certainly.
Yeah.
What you want to look at next is, do those embers now, do you have your deck wide open and the embers are allowed to blow underneath and
Right.
accumulate on the pillars or on the posts and accumulate there and burn that way, right? If you close it off, however, and you have that maybe that 3 mm screen going around that deck to reduce the ability of embers to get in there, maybe now you've increased your resilience even more, right? Or you can use some type of it's not aluminum foil, but it's that type of material where you can kind of wrap your posts as well and even create more resilience. So there's options like that that you can sort of utilize to increase your resilience. And again, it's a percentage game. We're trying to get as close to 100% as we can with that. So.
Okay, here's a question we missed. What to consider when choosing the position of campfire relative to the building? And are fireplaces with chimneys usable when fire dangers are higher?
Okay, so I'll start with the campfire question. I would suggest highly looking at your local bylaws. Normally, communities will have bylaws for campfires. I know the provincial standard is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter for the size of your campfire, and you want to make sure you have a 3 meter clearance all the way around your fire. And so that's what you want to make sure is in place provincially. Now, often I will say that those are more strict when you get into municipal bylaws. So certainly have a look there. Often, if you don't have a fire pit itself, you want to get down to the mineral soil. I would say also, it's a good idea to put some rocks around there or whatever the case is. Or if you're building it on bare rock, you can be okay there as well. But certainly there's some campfire tips as well, ontario.ca/forest fires, safe campfire. There's some tips in there as well for additional sort of things, but you want to have a shovel and you want to have a hose nearby, and always make sure that you're extinguishing your fire before you leave the area. Where we run into, and it's no joke, every year it seems, campfires and lightning fires are our two biggest cause of wildland fires, and it's always unattended campfires that seem to get away, or a gust of wind or something comes and carries the embers and transfers that campfire. So the campfires are a big one. I know it's something that we take for granted because we often have campfires. We feel pretty safe about them for the most part, but make sure you're putting that thing out before you go to bed. Ideally, that's the steps you want to take. I'll jump into the fireplaces with chimneys, usable when fire dangers are higher. That depends. If you have a fireplace that's built into your home, normally they'll have what's called a spark arrestor built onto the chimney, and that'll reduce the chance of embers being being thrown out of that chimney, and so then you're not going to have any danger from embers. Where it gets tricky is if you have outdoor fireplaces. There's pretty specific regulations on those. And again, if it's an enclosed fire, completely enclosed, and it has a chimney, it has to have that spark arrestor on it, on that chimney, so that no sparks can get out of it. Then it's not considered an open fire anymore. But if you have a fireplace that's open and it doesn't necessarily have that chimney built into it, or it's considered open flame, that's a different situation than an actual fireplace. So.
Good. And in McKellar, the fire department's more than happy to come and give you advice if you ask them. More than happy. They have a program for that.
Excellent.
And I think there was one other question.
Yes, I see one about using fire suppression systems around your house. That's an excellent question. So we often get questions about sprinkler systems, for example. Here's what I would say about sprinkler systems. If you get evacuated and you're gone for more than 8 hours, there's not necessarily going to be anybody there to top up your fuel tanks and replenish your sprinkler system. That said, it's not a bad thing to have. I would say two things. One, don't neglect the FireSmart system that we talked about today, the home ignition zone. I would say that's your step one. And then if you want to boost that system by using the suppression system around your home, the sprinkler system around your home, now you've sort of taken two tools and you put them together to increase your resilience tenfold, right? So I think the suppression system around your home is a really good option. I just don't think it can be 100% relied upon. I think you're much better off with the FireSmart system and couple that with the suppression system around your home.
Here's a different question. How about mosquito screens around a deck?
Mosquito screens around a deck. So those, generally speaking, would be made out of vinyl or cloth, right? And
Yeah.
so because embers, the heat that they pack, I would assume more times than not, it might stop some of them, but eventually those embers are going to burn through that screen. What we end up seeing is ember showers, and it's not just one or two embers that get lofted. It's several thousand or even millions of embers getting launched in one direction ahead of that fire, and they actually pack a lot of heat. So those types of materials aren't going to be able to be resistant to those embers as they approach that area, and that actually might even, the cloth ones might even act as fuel.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer, back to you, I think.
Well, I want to thank you again, Shayne, for a really thorough webinar on how we can help ourselves in terms of preventing our homes from burning during a wildfire. Of course, we're hoping desperately that nothing does happen like that in McKellar, but we did have a wildfire north of us in the French River area not too long ago, a few years ago. And so it certainly has happened in our area, and we want to be as prepared as we can. So I think you've gone a long way to helping us with that preparation, and we'll certainly be advertising this the availability of this knowledge and this webinar in the McKellar area this summer and next. And I just want to thank you again and wish you the best of luck in this very busy wildfire season. I know you're working very hard and are out in the field already, and we just hope that things go well. So
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invite, and I'm happy to share my knowledge. If anybody has any follow-up questions, like I said, affes.mitigation@ontario.ca can be a really good, useful resource for folks as they go through their FireSmart journey, and I'm more than happy to support that. So thank you very much, and I wish you all well, and thank you so much for including me in your webinar today.
okay, take care, Shayne. Thank you.
There's a lot of thank yous in the chat there.
Thank you so
And I'll
much.
put out the email address to our association.
Great, thank you.
Cool.
Take care, folks.
All right. Good night.
Bye.